Good morning. This tape recording work has become a very important part of our work, and probably for this reason. We can read books, we can read the Word, and evidently we do imbibe something from our reading, but we seem to imbibe more from hearing. And certainly the combination of reading and hearing has proven to be more effective than either one alone. And so the students who have availed themselves of the opportunity of reading the books and either being in class or hearing the classes on tape have made the greater progress in understanding. Now, this is something important, first of all, because it is the first time that this medium of the tape recordings has been used on a broad scale in religious instruction, and because it has shown a principle that is very important. There have been some other tape recording work done since ours was begun and dropped. Several times teachers have started it and dropped it. And the reason is this: the consciousness behind the work has a way of making itself felt in the tape recording, so that you do not merely get words on tape, but you catch the consciousness as well. Now, sometimes you catch that in reading. For instance, as you undoubtedly know, in the early days of Christian Science, there were thousands of healings just through the reading of the book. And the reason is that there were passages in those writings that came up out of a deep inspiration, revelation. And as you read those passages, the truth of them registered with you. They were not merely words, it was really truth itself coming up out of a deep, deep consciousness. And as you read those words, you caught the same consciousness that the author caught. Now, you will still find in reading the religious, and more especially the mystical literature of the world, that you will come across passages that thrill you from head to foot. And as you read them over and over again, you wonder why. They're just words strung out one after another, some beautiful. But it is only as you trace back some of these passages and find how they came through an inspired consciousness that you yourself catch that inspiration. The same thing has happened with our writings. Many healings have taken place through reading the books. And very often when students write me the particular passages, that I can smile because I can remember when they came through. And it's not a wonder to me that the inspiration that came with them conveys themselves even through a cold printed page. But with this medium of the tape recorder, something more vital and alive takes place. When phonographs first were given to us, and we had the recorded word, there was more inspiration in that spoken word or the songs that were sung than ever could be gotten from books. But nothing like what has happened with tape recorders, because this electronic work seems to catch everything, every quality of tone, every shading, and even the consciousness behind it, and place it on that tape to such an extent that sometimes when I have added passages, or when through mutilation I've had to do over a tape and read it, students write and say, "Don't do it. It doesn't sound authentic." They know whether a passage has been read onto the tape or whether it was put on there in classwork. They can feel the difference between a passage that's been read and a passage that came through as our work has come through in class. Evidently, that electronic mechanism picks up every single vibration, not only of voice but of consciousness, and makes itself felt, so that this work on the recorder has proven itself to be almost as effective as being present in class itself. Now, for students who have been in class when the recording was made, the tapes prove even more valuable, because it seems that when they hear them again, it places them right back in the room and right back in the atmosphere of the other students, and the whole thing rushes in upon them again and floods them with the same consciousness they had when they were sitting in the room. So this has become a very important part of our work, and I would like you to know this, that publishers are becoming aware of the importance of recorders and are seeking ways right now to place books on tapes, feeling that the books will have more power when they're heard than when they're read. There are many complications involved in that which they haven't overcome, but they're working on it because it has been recognized what happens when you hear a message as against reading it. And so it is that Mrs. Lindsay is very particular that this microphone get in the right place so that the message gets there the way she likes it. Now this morning, we ought to talk for a little while about the healing work, the why and the wherefore of it, and also clarify for you the difference between mental healing and spiritual healing. In order to understand that, it is necessary to remember that non-medical healing had its beginning in hypnotism. That Dr. Mesmer first began healing through forms of hypnosis, not always putting the patient to sleep, but depending on this animal magnetic current that supposedly passes from one individual to another. And it was a student of Dr. Mesmer who landed in Portland, Maine, and taught Mr. Quimby the art of mesmerism, hypnotism, and sent Mr. Quimby out on the platform with a young boy, entertaining, and then later healing. This boy, under hypnosis, seemed able to diagnose a person's ills and prescribe the remedy. Usually a mental remedy, like, well, this is rheumatism and it's caused because you're jealous, and if you'll overcome your jealousy, you'll lose your hypnotism, and so forth, which you will recognize became the foundation for the original metaphysical healing. Quimby himself outgrew the hypnotic method of work, but never the animal magnetic, never the dependency on sitting knee to knee or back to back and having a contact with his patients, because the two best known students of his started out with that form of practice. Dr. Evans is perhaps the best known of his earliest students, and Dr. Evans' first book is about as mental as mentality itself. It's, to read it is kind of shocking from our standpoint, because it occasionally uses spiritual terminology, God and Christ and Spirit, but it sends shivers up and down your spine to see the way they're used in connection with something that is as mental as mentality can be. But Dr. Evans wrote 5 books over a period of years, from 1859 to about 1869 or 70 something. And the last one of his books showed the tremendous progress that he made in those years through the mental processes up into the more spiritually enlightened understanding. Dr. Evans' 5th book is really a remarkable book in showing the vision that he caught through his practice, through actual experience in the practice. It doesn't appear that Dr. Evans had any students, or at least any students that did very much, since I know of only one other man who wrote around the same time, but his work is of no consequence. And of course, Mrs. Eddy was a patient and student of Dr. Quimby, and from her own writings and her own letters, it is clear that she started healing work under the auspices of Quimby and with the methods that Quimby used. You find in some of her earlier works that she made the same mistake that mental practitioners do today, take on the disease of the patient. And then she would have to write back to Mr. Quimby to get her free. Any mental practitioner can do the same thing. Just take on the very condition that he's trying to heal the patient of. Sometimes heals the patient and takes on the disease himself, and then has to struggle to get clear of the condition. But if you follow Mrs. Eddy from her earliest work, you will find a transition just like that of Dr. Evans, only going far beyond Dr. Evans because she had many more years and much more experience in which to accomplish it. But you will find how she also, well, in her early days, she sent out lists which now form the basis of psychological healing and psychiatric healing. The very lists with the same words and the same order are circulating in Materia Medica that went out from her, showing that resentment causes this, and jealousy causes cancer, and so forth and so on. Now, Mrs. Eddy, as she advanced in spiritual understanding, saw the wrongness of that mode of practice, and she recalled those lists. And I think that most of the students were obedient in turning them in and giving up that form of practice. One who seems unable or unwilling to give it up was Mr. Kimball. He sort of persisted in the idea that there was a mental cause for a physical disease, and that you could trace the specific mental cause to a specific physical disease. Now, as is natural, when a work like Mrs. Eddy's or Quimby's, anybody's, when anybody's work begins in any direction, you will find that there will be offshoots from it. Even in our short years in this work, 2 of our students have felt compelled to have wonderful illuminations and have left the infinite way to organize their own teaching. It always happens, and sometimes it isn't bad that it does, because occasionally some wonderful unfoldments come. And so it was that some of Mrs. Eddy's early students, for one reason or another, left her and became independent. And then also the son of one of Mr. Quimby's students sued Mrs. Eddy on the grounds that she was plagiarizing Mr. Quimby's teachings. And when it came to court, he refused to bring the documents in which were supposedly plagiarized, and so the case was thrown out. And then Mr. Dresser started a movement of his own with these documents which were supposedly plagiarized but then weren't proven so. Now, that was the beginning of New Thought. Then in 1892, the Fillmore started Unity. And the early days of Unity are completely filled with Christian Science practitioners, former members of the Christian Science Church, students of Christian Science, so that probably all of the early recognized workers were Christian scientists. Now, I bring you this history not because the history is of any importance in and of itself, but for the purpose of showing you that behind healing there is a principle. If you know it, you can do and continue to do healing work. If you do not know it, you will ultimately fall by the wayside. Now, I will say this to you. New Thought at no time in its entire history has ever known the secret of healing. No time have they ever used the secret of healing, and for that reason, New Thought cannot heal. Whatever little mental healing it can do has no relationship to spiritual healing, but on the whole, the New Thought movement has been reduced in size to the very small thing that it is today from a very big movement in America and in England by virtue of the fact that it has not maintained its healing power. In England, there is virtually no metaphysical or New Thought movement outside of the personal work of Henry Thomas Hamblin and his Science of Thought Review, and a very small metaphysical work based on a lot of American books, but with no one claiming to be able to heal, no one claiming to be able to do healing work, just lectures and books. And it is for this reason that in England there are no recognized teachers or teachings. If you go to lectures, you are apt to hear one American lecturer today and a different one next week if they are over there, or an English one today and another one next week, and so forth and so on. You just go to these centers and you hear whoever is there. You are not taught a specific principle. You are not taught a specific way of life. And that is about the system here. Over here, you can make your selection of a dozen different books by a dozen different authors. A few of the old ones, old original ones, are still good. And but there is no specific teaching with a specific principle that has been able to stand up over the years, except what has been maintained in Christian Science. Now, one of the higher officers of the Christian Science Church told me that he believes about 20% of their practitioners really understand this principle of healing. And in Unity, healing is almost at a standstill, except in the case of a few individual practitioners. And their churches are becoming more and more orthodox, with more and more orthodox Christian trimmings. In the New Thought field, Dr. Bales maintains the highest integrity of mental healing. And he calls it mental healing and understands it to be mental healing. And it is evidently doing marvelous things for many people who are able to be helped through that work. Now, the answer to all this lies in this. Is there a principle of healing? What is the principle of healing? And what will it accomplish after you know it? Yes, there is a principle of healing. Metaphysical, spiritual healing. And that principle is this. Material sense appears externally as good and evil material conditions. Now, through the second chapter of Genesis, you learn that there is a second creator, and that's the mind. And if you understand these principles of mind, you can mentally manipulate this universe almost to suit yourself. We have seen it in our national history when in 1914, 15, 16, the American people could not be forced into war, could not be roused into any desire for war, that a propaganda bureau was formed, and inside of 6 months had the people so inflamed that they begged to go to war. That is how World War I was brought about. World War II, you know how it was brought about. On the eve of election, you were told that if I am reelected, not one American soldier will ever set foot on foreign soil. We were already in war. But it took that little arrangement out at Pearl Harbor to rouse the people to furious indignation. That was propaganda too. If you know how to mentally manipulate, you can rouse people individually or collectively. To do it for good purposes isn't a good thing, because in the end you can do it for evil purposes. In miscellaneous writings, Mrs. Eddy has a very strange statement. Those of you who are familiar with Christian Science will certainly think it's strange. She says the same mind that can do good can do evil. And you know she's not talking about divine mind. It is true that humanly you can use the powers of the human mind to heal mentally. You can use it to sell merchandise. You can even use it to sell whiskey. You can use the human mind for good or for evil. You can improve your condition with right thinking. You can harm your condition with wrong thinking, all on the mental plane. Not a bit of this has anything to do with God or with spiritual reality. It has to do with you as a human being using the natural mind forces in whatever direction you wish to use them. Fortunately for the world, it isn't an easy thing to develop powers of concentration, and for that reason there aren't many people who have developed themselves either on the good or the bad side, because it isn't easy. Now, to heal mentally, requires a knowledge of the mental principles. And the reason why most of the mental healing organizations in this country do not do better healing work is that they do not know the very first law of mental healing. Now, Dr. Bales may be an exception because he is so successful that I have a suspicion that he may know it. I don't know because I haven't studied his writings. But I have observed the effect of them on people here and in Europe. But otherwise, from what I have read, I find no sign of the very first law, if you call it that, knowledge, in mental healing that must be known in order for there to be successful healing. And that is this: it isn't your wrong thinking that is getting you in trouble. And so it is utter nonsense to talk to you about improving yourself or changing your thinking or becoming more loving or more generous or more pure or more something or other. Any attempt to change the patient mentally must result in ultimate failure, regardless of any temporary success that there may be. There is only one mind spiritually, but so there is only one so-called human mind, mentality. And so it is that even those who are suffering from wrong thinking are not suffering from their wrong thinking. That wrong thinking was on earth before they were born. Just by virtue of being born, they took it on. We, that is the cause of most of our suffering. We were born under the law, not under grace. We came into this world under law, not under grace. Everyone who is born a Hebrew. Never doubt that for a single moment. Everyone who is born a Hebrew. That is why there is so much anti-Semitism in the world. Everybody's rejecting what innately they are in the center of their being. Everyone who is born has to be a Hebrew, because to be a Hebrew means to be born under the law. What is the first rule you accept in Sunday school, even in a Christian Sunday school? The 10 Commandments. The very 10 Commandments that you learn later did not come by Christ Jesus. Do you not see that? They came by Moses. They were set aside by Christ Jesus, but not by the Christian church. The Christian church adopted the 10 Commandments or the law. Now, because we are born under the law, and the law is cause and effect. That's the law that you're born under. If you sit in a draft, you'll catch a cold. If you bruise yourself, you'll get black and blue. If you steal, you'll go to jail. So forth and so on. Always, if you do wrong, there is punishment. And the reason is that you are under the law of cause and effect. You are under the law of reward and punishment. Supposedly, if you do good, you get rewarded. If you do evil, you get punished. Well, the punishment is sure. The reward is often delayed. Now then, you are not to blame for any infraction of the law, because those things that make us break the law are not innate in us, but in humanity. In the law, if you will, of self-preservation. A man won't starve to death as long as he can steal. Of course, at first he'll work for it, but if he can't work, he'll borrow, and if he can't borrow, in the last analysis, he'll steal and justify himself on the grounds that without it he would have starved to death or his family would have. In other words, he is invoking the law of self-preservation. But under Christ Jesus, you are told that unless you lose your life, you will not find it. Now then, we, as individuals, come under the law. Now, in my earliest healing days, before I knew anything of Christian Science or New Thought or any of other teaching, I made this discovery, and that is that nobody is suffering from their own sins. Nobody is suffering from their own wrong thinking. Nobody is suffering from anything that has to do with them, and I proved it by the healing works in this wise, that when they told me their troubles, I handled it as a universal claim, not a personal one. In other words, if someone said they had a cold, I didn't go looking into their thought for it. I just handled it as a universal claim of a law or activity apart from the spiritual. I had the experience in my very earliest practice of having 4 cases of venereal disease come to me, and in not one case did I ever place blame on the individual or tell them that it served them right or that they were paying a penalty for their wrongdoing. On the contrary, I turned from the appearance in the realization that the whole of the law was Mosaic. The whole belief in punishment was a Mosaic law. The whole belief was a universal claim of a condition apart from God, of a person apart from God. And I had 4 healings. Then, in handling tuberculosis, where there was infection, contagion, weather, never once did I take the particular case into consideration or the particular person. At no time. All that I handled was universal law. And realize what about law? Law isn't power, grace is. Now, mental scientists know nothing about grace, and that is why they do not know that you do not change one law for another. That you annihilate the whole of law, even the good law, and bring grace into the situation. Without a knowledge of grace, there is no healing. Without a knowledge of grace, healing becomes an impossibility because you have law and the infraction of law. How are you going to deal with it? Are you going to punish it, or are you going to forgive it? And if you punish it, you have done nothing to it, and if you forgive it, you've done nothing to it, because you still have the 2 letters IT, it. You never will get rid of that until you introduce grace and have grace set aside the whole of the Mosaic law. The law of self-preservation is perhaps one of those laws most strongly entrenched in human thought, and it is for this reason that we are always catering to it. We are pleasing ourselves because of self-preservation. We want to preserve our identity. We want to preserve our egos. We want to preserve our station in life. We want to preserve our front. We want to preserve our reputation. We are always in the business of self-preservation. The same selfhood that we are told in the New Testament must die daily. Now, in handling cases mentally, and even in spiritual healing, you have to meet with a situation and handle it for the simple reason that there is no such thing as absolute healing. There is no such thing as absolute truth. There is no such thing as any absolute teaching that can be made practical in your experience. You can, of course, if you like, sit on cloud 9 and say God is love and there is no error, and watch yourself a year later. You can, if you like, ignore all the appearances of the world and just say they don't exist. Watch yourself. But I say to you, after my 27 years of work, that you'll be far better off to give up any hopes of being absolute for the privilege of bringing harmony into your experience and the experience of those who touch you in this world. And you can bring harmony into them not by being absolute and saying there is no error or God is love, but by knowing what they're suffering from and annihilating it. And I can tell you that they are suffering from the Mosaic law, the law of cause and effect, the law of karma, the law of fear. Everyone on earth fears. They fear ultimate extinction or death. And even when they're promised immortality, they don't want to die to prove it. They'd rather stay here and just declare, I am immortal, but don't make me declare it over there. Now, and I don't blame them, I like it here too. But the point is that unless you recognize, first of all, that your patients are not suffering from any fault of their own, they really aren't. Regardless of what they do, there is an impulsion from the universal. Even in the love of children, you'll find that parents are suffering terribly because it's their own children that they love, not the other fellow. And usually they love their own to the deep exclusion of every other. And so it is we love our red, white, and blue to the exclusion of the other. And we love our own particular denomination to the exclusion of the other. Even love is based on a false premise. Until you arrive at that love, which is a love of God, and then has no division. Then there's no my child or yours, my patient or yours, my student or yours, or my teaching or yours. There's just the one. Anyone who is God realized is in the universal religion, and they need fear nothing from any other. On the other hand, they have much to share with every other one. When Swami Ramdas made his trip around the world, his purpose was to reveal that it is possible to love everyone on the face of the globe, regardless of their race, religion, crime, or color, creed. That was the object of his trip, and he feels that he succeeded because on his entire trip he never met anyone under any circumstances that he couldn't love equally with his own. So to himself at least he demonstrated that spiritual love, and for those who can grasp him, he demonstrated that spiritual love knows no competition. Spiritual love is all-inclusive. Spiritual love never tries to draw unto itself. But the law of self-preservation is always trying to get what belongs to it and probably a little bit of what might belong to somebody else. Now, if you divide us up into separate people and then try mentally to improve us, you will not get far. You just won't. If, however, you begin to understand this world as a family of men and women, a spiritual family of the household of God, you will at once rise above nation, color, creed, sect, or denomination, and you will rise above all sense of competition in your business. You will never again know the word competition in your business. It will never touch you. It will just be a word in a dictionary. You will never experience it. When on the human plane you meet those who are sometimes good and sometimes bad, sometimes sick and sometimes well, you will learn never to hold them in judgment, criticism, or condemnation, even while correcting them. Why? Because you will realize that it isn't a personal fault of theirs, it isn't a personal sin, and it isn't anything that they can correct. That's very important for you to know, that they cannot correct it, and all the instruction you could give them on correcting it will not succeed. You just try telling a jealous person they shouldn't be jealous and that they must correct that. You just try telling a person in fear of supply that they ought to be generous and see whether you make any inroad to them. You just try to make a person with any human endowment other than what they are and see how you will fail on that level. But there is a way in which you can free them of their discords, of their erroneous human traits. There is a way in which you can free them of their sins and of their diseases, and that is by turning from them and recognizing, first of all, this is the law, and it isn't power. This is a law of self-preservation. It's a law of ego. It isn't a law. It isn't a cause. It isn't a power. Why? Well, whether or not the mentalists like it at the present time, the only power is spirit. And there's no power in the mind. Mind isn't power except on the level of belief. No one could stop you from believing that 2 times 2 is 5 if you are that stupid. But that doesn't make it a power. It doesn't make it a power, and you never will be able to put 2 and 2 together and get 5 out of it, no matter how much you believe it. Not even if the world believes it. All the world believing the earth was flat didn't make it so. There wasn't any power in that belief. The only power there was in preventing those who believed it from going out to sea. The only one a belief has power over is the believer. So take my word for it, mind isn't power. And don't ever believe that it is. And thoughts aren't power, and don't ever believe that they are. Thoughts can only deceive the one who's thinking them. They can't be a power. Spirit is power, soul is power, consciousness is power, truth is power. 2 times 2 is 4 is power. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do is power. You try to change them by thinking. Try to change them. Try to change the movement of the tides by thinking. Try to change the movement of the heavens and the earth by thinking. Try to change the rotation of the crops by thinking. You'll find that the mind is nothing but a Santa Claus giver. It can give and it can withhold. But it isn't the giver. It isn't the power. The power is within you, and it doesn't operate through conscious thought. The power is within you, and it doesn't operate through conscious thought. It only operates when conscious thought has stopped. Let me read you this. We have seen matter in many forms. This is one of my own notes. We have seen matter in many forms and material power in many degrees, from candle power to hydrogen. Now, what happens when material power reaches its ultimate? Is there nothing beyond this? Think of the limit of material power, then take off into the immaterial. How? Think first of material power in many of its forms: candle power, gas power, electric power, and now atomic power, hydrogen power. Think of it in its tremendousness. And continue thinking until you reach the point where you cannot think another thought, where you cannot get into a greater or more difficult or more destructive power. And when thinking stops, it starts. The real power that wipes out all material power, even the hydrogen. Now listen to this. The beginning of the next demonstrable power will come where conscious thinking leaves off. I repeat it. The beginning, I'm speaking for the world as well as for you individually, the beginning of the next demonstrable power will come where conscious thinking leaves off. Now, if you want to prove that, you have a problem, your own or someone else's, and you would like to work on it, go off somewhere where you can be completely alone, away from the telephone, away from anyone's interference, so that you can have 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And take that problem, look at it, and begin to know whatever it is that you can know about it, whether on the destructive side or the constructive side. Think the thing through until you come to a place where you just can't think anymore. And you'll find you still have the problem. And now when you've reached that place where there just is nothing more to think about it, you'll also probably find, if not the first time, the third or fourth time, that you are able to sit back in an atmosphere of no thinking, where no thought comes at all, where you are just in a peaceful inner atmosphere of quiet. And when you are in that, you have contacted the power that will destroy your problem. The actual spiritual healing work is based on that. It is based on the fact that no amount of truth that you can know about God or man is going to solve the problem or heal the disease. All it's going to do is to keep quieting you until you can get into such a peaceful atmosphere that you really feel yourself almost floating in God. Not asleep, not dead. It is nothing like that. It's not a form of hypnosis where you're halfway in 2 destructive worlds. It is a peace, it is a, call it the peace that passeth understanding. It's an aliveness. It's a tingling. You can't go to sleep. You never want to go to sleep again. You just want to stay awake forever and forever and forever. It's wonderful. It's alive. It's alert. And yet it's peaceful and quiet. And then when you're in there and you're in that absolute quiet, that's when something happens. Something that bursts the bubble. And then when you come out of it, you'll find within minutes or hours or days that your problem has dissolved. Now your problem is a mentally created image based on law. You can call it the law of karma, and you won't be wrong. You can call it the Christian law of cause and effect. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. If you sow to the flesh, you'll reap corruption. If you sow to the spirit, you'll reap life everlasting. You won't be wrong. You'll be right. It is a Mosaic law. You either have in your thought dishonored your concept of God, and now you're suffering from it, or you've dishonored your mother, and you're suffering from it, or you've envied somebody something, or stolen, or committed adultery in one form or another, and you're suffering. You're suffering from a world belief that you've done wrong. Well, as a matter of fact, you've done wrong even if you've been good and honest and pure, because all you've done is conform to a human standard of conduct, which has, in many cases, no relationship to the spiritual. You even heard that honesty is the best policy, and so you may be honest because of that. That isn't being good, and that isn't being spiritual. That's being under the law of self-preservation. Now then, the law came by Moses. The law of karma, the law of cause and effect, came by Moses. But grace and truth came by Christ Jesus. In other words, the law is for those who live humanly. Grace is for those who live spiritually. And the very moment that you are willing to let go of the law of self-preservation, the law of self-righteousness, the law of self-condemnation, the law of condemnation of others, and abide in love. That is, in the feeling that God is equally the parent of all, and we love each other as children of God, and we share with each other as children of God, then you will find a transition takes place in your metaphysical life. You would no more be guilty of trying to demonstrate supply than you would of stealing it, because you know that if you attempt to demonstrate it, you're just taking it out of this world of effect where probably now it belongs to somebody else, but tomorrow it's going to be yours. You've probably heard the story of the fellow who had to go to Europe and couldn't get a ticket. And so he did some mental work, and the man got sick and he got his ticket. And years ago they used to tell the other one of a lady riding in a bus, and over her head there was a piece of baggage, and hanging over, looking dangerously near to falling, and she began to know the truth, and it fell on the lady in front of her. And, you know, you could visualize $20 bills. And so if I sat up here visualizing, I probably would draw them out of your pocket. Since those are the only pocketbooks around for them to come out of, they probably would come out of yours. You wouldn't like that. But neither would you think of it the next time you started visualizing $20 bills and wondering whose pocket they were going to come out of. No, you'll never be guilty of trying to demonstrate even a parking space. Why? Because never again will you want anything that is already in the world of effect. You will be satisfied to have your good come to you out of the infinite invisible. You will be satisfied to be patient and wait until you can demonstrate the presence of God, knowing that the realization of the presence of God is fulfillment. There's the word of demonstration for you, fulfillment. A realization of the presence of God is fulfillment. Health, wealth, companionship, home, transportation. And not out of what already exists, but out of what the Father sends forth from within us, even though it will appear in some human form in the without. You see, spiritually, you are infinite. You are as infinite as God. And so it's a sin to desire anything. When Mrs. Eddy said that desire is prayer, she meant it in the same light that Jesus said, ask, knock, seek. In the sense of a desire for God is prayer, a desire to know God is prayer, a desire for Christ's realization is prayer, a desire to know Him aright is prayer, a desire for spiritual realization is prayer, a desire to be loved of God and to love God with all the heart and with all the soul and with all the mind. This is prayer. And that desire is prayer. To ask God to give Himself to us, to ask God to bless us with His grace. This is asking, knocking, and receiving. But the moment we reduce our desire or our asking or our knocking or our seeking to some form of material good, we are under the law. We are under the law. You know why it is claimed that Moses himself did not get into the promised land? Because he sought a demonstration of water. He was going to get water out of a rock. Because he sought demonstration, he was refused admittance to the promised land. Now that's known in all theological circles that the reason Moses was not permitted to enter the promised land was that he tapped that rock for water. He showed his power. Now you see, the master wouldn't do that. When the master was an hungered and was tempted to demonstrate food, he said, "Oh no, get thee behind me, Satan. I will make no personal demonstrations." 3 times he was tempted to use his personal powers if he had any. 3 times he refused. "Oh no, that's God's function to supply me. It's God's function to have dominion, not mine." And in resisting the temptation to demonstrate, he showed that he was above the law of mind and matter, and he had entered the realm of pure spirit, the kingdom of God, in which it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom, not to give you a method of getting the kingdom, but give you the kingdom. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. I have never seen the righteous begging bread. And that doesn't mean the churchly person. It means those who rightly discern the grace of God. Those who live by grace, not by might, nor by power, not by physical might, not by mental power, but by spiritual grace. But there is no reason while you're knowing this that you cannot at the same time realize that whatever degree of suffering there is in this world is due to being under the law. And not holding anyone in bondage and not trying to correct them, but destroy the operation of the law for them by realizing that it isn't the power. God, we learned the other night, is the only power. God is one. God is spirit. And so when you come across a physical law, like infection or contagion or lack, or when you come across a mental law, wipe them out with the understanding that they aren't power. God is a jealous God, and God does not give its power to you or to me. God's power functions through you or me, just as the inspiration that comes to a composer or an artist is not his inspiration or hers, it's God's inspiration. It merely flows through the artist or the composer. The grace is always God's, not man's. When man thinks that he has a gift, he learns that it peters out, and in a few short years he's all dried up, and he wonders why the new ideas aren't flowing. He claimed them for his own. He believed it was his gift. He believed that God favored him, perhaps, and gave him this talent. It isn't true. God never gives his talent to anybody. God maintains his talent within himself and expresses it freely and joyously through us, but it remains God's talent. Those who know this never run dry. They never run out of inspiration, because the inspiration wasn't theirs. It was God's, and they were the instrument through which it appears on earth. When there is a restricted inspiration, when there is a restricted supply of anything, health, money, opportunity, always remember this. Some universal law is operating. You're under the law. Remember that, and then begin not to condemn yourself, not to try to seek how to improve yourself. Stop that nonsense. Leave that for the psychologists and the psychiatrists who have to go to other psychologists and psychiatrists to get free. They will learn someday that there is a principle that will free them the minute they stop taking condemnation off of you and me and their patients, and realize that we're not suffering from our wrong thinking any more than a newborn babe is suffering from its wrong thinking. And certainly, who wants to blame the parents for the wrong thinking of innocent children?